Thank you very much, Dr. Hartman and Sister, and thank you all for coming out this evening. It's colder here tonight. I was getting my hopes up for 70 degrees, and now we're back to snow. I can't imagine what your winter has been like, though. Was it 70 degrees all? It was, yes, I was in Buffalo on Sunday, and it was 70 degrees, and I said, oh, Buffalo is just a sunshine state. That didn't go over too well. I don't think I'm going to use this microphone. See, is that okay? Can you hear me? If you can't, you're not missing too much, but raise your hand and I'll try to speak louder. Is that okay? This is like, reminds me of the true story of the young priest giving his first sermon, and he's very nervous, and he comes to the podium and the microphone, and he taps on the microphone, and he says, something's wrong with this microphone, and the congregation goes, and also with you. It's my best joke, everybody. I want to really thank Sister Joan, who invited me here, and I see there's I suspect some Dominican sisters sitting here up front. And some of you are students here at Ohio Dominican. You know, you're all so lucky to have these great wisdom peacemakers here. How about a round of applause for Sister Joan? Thank you for coming out. Thank you for having a forum on justice and to talking about these serious issues, all the speakers that you've had. As you heard, I've been traveling around the country talking about peace and nonviolence and you know, just trying to reflect on this world of ours. What's going on? What do we do? And for those of you who are students, you know, I just encourage you to learn from these great teachers of peace how to be a peacemaker. My question for you is, what do we do in a world of violence and war? How do we become peacemakers? What does it mean to be a peacemaker? How are you going to leave the culture of violence and war and spend the rest of your life as a peacemaker, walking the road of peace and nonviolence? I mean, it's the critical question of the time. So maybe I could share a little bit about my own journey and then talk about the world of violence and war. And then look at the alternative of peace and nonviolence and some of my points of my new book. And then if you can stand it, I might add a little bit about the religious basis, the Christian roots of peace and nonviolence. And then we have time for question and answers at the end. And by then we will have resolved everything. How does that sound? And please call me John, because my name is just so darn goofy. Father Dear just doesn't. It's just embarrassing. I'm just back from South Africa for a month. It was just life-changing. A long time goal of mine, pilgrimage, because I had worked hard in the 80s against apartheid, but I couldn't get into South Africa. And it was just, I could talk about it all night. You know, we went to Johannesburg and Soweto. We used to have a church in Washington, D.C. that was the sister parish. The main headquarters against apartheid was actually, of all things, the Catholic Church in Soweto, which could seat 5,000 people. The student uprising in 1976 came out of that church. The church is going strong today. It's covered with bullet holes. And that just says something so much about how the movement, as Dr. King says, the church is the place you go from. And to go there and spend some time with Winnie Mandela, who's so frail now, and I had used to correspond with her. And then we went, how many of you saw the movie Gandhi? I hope if you students haven't seen it, go and watch it. It's the best movie ever made. And the beginning of the movie is he's a dopey kid. The parents are so embarrassed by him, they ship him off to South Africa because he's such an incompetent lawyer. And he gets a first-class ticket. Well, that's, of course, it's all apartheid. It's only white people. He's sitting in the front section. He gets thrown off the train in the middle of the night. If you remember, that's how the movie begins. The middle of nowhere in South Africa. He's not Gandhi. He's a dopey nobody. And it's 11 at night, freezing cold, really scary, in the middle of nowhere. And there he's on the floor of the waiting room. He's thrown off. His stuff is over there. He doesn't even go to get it because he's so scared. And he sits there till 9 the next morning, trying to decide, what am I going to do? This is it. What do you do in the face of injustice? He said in his autobiography, when I stood up, my life of active nonviolence began. We went to that train station. It's still there today from 1893. It's a goofy old orange brick Victorian British train station. Here's the same waiting room where Gandhi spent the night. And we prayed there that we might have, and for all of us, a spirit, the spirit of Gandhi, that courageous nonviolence to take on injustice. Then we went to Durban where he built his ashram. Then we went to Port Elizabeth. You saw the movie Cry Freedom about Steve Biko, my hero. It had a big impact on me as a kid. He was 30 when he was tortured and executed. In some ways, I think he's greater than Mandela, because his vision was black consciousness. In other words, every human being is a human being. This is really important. We all forget that, but he was encouraging the black South Africans being killed and tortured by the white South Africans. We went to his grave, and then to Cape Town, to Robben Island, to see Mandela's cell. And then my last day I spent with my friend and teacher, Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And I could talk about that a lot, but I want to begin by saying the first thing, the great man, Bono says he's the greatest living person. He's such a prophet. The first thing he said to me when I walked in the room, I'm going to say to you, we can never give up the struggle for justice and peace. We have to be at this till the day we die. This caught me off guard, and I was mighty impressed, because he's 82, and his health is not good. And he's been under death threat since he was 13 years old. And he's still under death threat, because right now he's speaking out against the corruption of the ANC. You know, the government, if you know what's happening in South Africa. And the next day he was leaving for Iran. And he said, we have to be working for justice and peace for our sisters and brothers all around the planet till the day we die. That's my message for you in a nutshell. My hope for all of us, that we have to keep at this, whether we like it or not, sister. I'm trying to make them laugh, but it's not working. I'm 54, and I was not like any of you holy, peacemaking Ohio Dominican students when I was a wild college kid at Duke in the 70s. I better not tell you about it. A setback for Ohio Dominican. Anyway, a long story short, I got, knocked off the fraternity bar stool and saw the light, like St. Paul, sort of. And I'm still trying to make it laugh. This is not working. And decided to give my life to Jesus. My parents were so appalled, and they asked me to wait. I was going to be a Jesuit. Okay. And I thought, well, if I'm going to follow Jesus, I want to get to know where he lived. So I decided to spend the summer, when I was 21, hitchhiking through Israel to see where Jesus lived. Except the week I left, Israel invaded Lebanon. Some of you remember the summer war of 1982. It was all orchestrated out of the Pentagon. And I researched it for my autobiography, remember, which was they called it Operation Peace for Galilee. Such insanity. And all the Holy Land tours are canceled. I'm 21 years old, just out of college, hitchhiking for 3 months through Israel, just oblivious to everything, camping out at the Sea of Galilee, visiting the Chapel of the Beatitudes, and reading these words on the walls of a little church by the Sea of Galilee for the first time in my life. You know them by heart, I hope. Blessed are the poor. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek, the gentle, the non-violent. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice. I was overwhelmed by this. I'm looking at it's written on the walls. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are the pure in heart. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are those persecuted for working for justice. And on the altar, love your enemies. This is how the Sermon on the Mount begins. And as you see, I'm not that bright. And this light went on, and I suddenly thought to myself, oh my God, I think this guy's serious. Like, isn't the point that somebody else is supposed to do that? No, the whole darn point of all of Christianity, the church, everything, is to live the Sermon on the Mount, to work for justice and peace. Period. That's what the guy wants. This was just freaked me out. And I walked out in the balcony there. I'm looking out over the whole Sea of Galilee. And when you're on holy pilgrimage, you get wackier than usual, and I was talking to God, and I'm looking up at the sky, are you trying to tell me I'm supposed to do that? And I thought, okay, God, I promise to give my life to the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount on one condition, if you give me a sign. Well, that's great. I found a loophole, because we don't get signs. All of a sudden, there were these loud explosions, and 3 black Israeli jets fell from the sky, breaking the sound barrier, setting off these sonic booms, boom, 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 and they swooped down over the Sea of Galilee and over my head, and dropped a whole bunch of bombs, killing people, 15 miles away. Changed my life. Because, for a split second, I opened my eyes, just in case God appeared. And what did I see? The reality of the world, which is mass murder. Sisters and brothers killing sisters and brothers all over the planet like it's perfectly normal. We call this sociopathic behavior. Sociopathic. If you're killing people and then you go on to have dinner like nothing, this is insanity. Doing it in the name of God. Even in the name of Jesus. Even at the place where he said, love your enemies. By the way, that's the most political statement ever. It's the end of the nation-state system. And I said, well, all right, I'm getting with the program. And I joined every peace and justice I could. Like the sisters here, Pax Christi and FOR, and all of our causes. In 1885, I went to live and work in El Salvador. This incredible university run by the Jesuits at the height of the war. 75,000 people killed there. They sent me out to work in a refugee camp. The U.S. was bombing the refugee camp. And the theory was when the death squad soldiers came in with machine guns, the young, white, gringo kid, seminarian, would go out to greet them. And maybe the death squads will open fire on everybody because I'm here, because the white guy's here. Talk about working through your peace and nonviolence really fast. I mean, here are these guys with machine guns. And I'm like, hi, how you doing? Can I get you a cup of coffee? What do you say? And I was with these incredible Jesuits. And they ran this university, which was not that much bigger than Ohio Dominican. They had this famous president, priest, who was a world-famous theologian. And he's the most political person I've met in my entire life, except with Julian Assange, who's a friend of mine. To me, one of the greatest, maybe the leading voice against war on the planet at the moment. Ignacio Ellacuría was his name. And I went into, this should be like going to meet the president of Ohio Dominican. And I've just flown in to El Salvador on a Friday morning. And you'd think, like the president of Ohio Dominican, that would be, that would be pretty nice. You'd be like, oh, welcome. We sit down at the table with Ignacio Ellacuría, this really tough guy. And he says, what do you want to say right from the beginning? I mean, it's like nothing, like, how are you? How was your trip? Like, the purpose of the Jesuit University here in El Salvador, I want you to know from the start, is to promote the reign of God. I never thought, I don't know, is that the way you all talk here at all? I'm just saying, I don't know. I mean, can you imagine saying it? Their house was bombed 21 times up to when I met them in 1985. He was getting 10 to 15 death threats a week for the 7 years up to that. It's the second thing he said to me that I invite you to reflect on. We have I wish all the best for Ohio Dominican, and it's great what you're doing, but I don't think we have anything like in the United States what they were trying to do. He said, however, we have found in El Salvador, this is what I want you to think about. If you're going to be for the reign of God, you have to stand up publicly, actively against the anti-reign. You can no longer say you're a person for peace in the world ever again, unless you stand up publicly, actively against war. You can't say, I'm going to be a good person with my life and do the good in a philosophical sense, unless you also, from now on, stand up publicly, actively against systemic, structured, institutionalized, global evil. Friends, this is exactly what Mahatma Gandhi said. Gandhi said the world has changed so much now. We're into total evil. That non-cooperation with evil is as much a duty as cooperation with good. If you're just doing the good, then you're silent and complicit with the killing of people around the world. You see his point? So he said, so we are forcing the whole university, the purpose of the university is to end all war and injustice in El Salvador. It's not to educate the students. It's to get the students to go and end all the wars and just imagine, the only place I know of, St. Mary's in Emmitsburg, said that their purpose of that little college was going to be to end the death penalty in the United States. Anyway, so he said, I'm just sharing my journey, and forgive me if I get excited about it. You're probably going, this guy's having way too much coffee. So, in El Salvador, we are against the U.S. bombing, the U.S. military, which is funding the killing of the people, the 75,000 people. We're against the junta, the 14 families which run the whole country and steal all the money. We're against the violence of the FMLN rebels. We're against the violence of poverty and starvation. We are against violence on all sides. And everybody hates us and wants to kill us. And this is what it means to be a Christian. Are there any questions? It's scary. And that night they had a dinner party for me and my little group of friends. And, the whole living room was just covered with bullet holes. The chairs we were sitting in, because they would be sitting at dinner regularly, and they'd see, it's like, this is what the United States does is kill people in Latin America. Their car would come by, they'd see it come out by the window, and the machine guns would come out, and they'd duck under the table, be strafed, the car would keep going, and then they'd go on with dinner. And I'm like, they're telling me these stories, I'm like, get me out of here. Anyway, I could go on and on about it. Maybe you've heard what happened to my friends, Korea. November 16th, 1989, 6 Jesuit priests, the president, the vice president, the head of the psychology department, the head of the engineering department, all these great guys, were woken up at 1 in the morning by 28 soldiers, 19 of them trained near Atlanta, Georgia at the School of the Americas, forced out of their house in their pajamas, made to lie down on the ground in front of the house, and then they were shot and killed, my friends. And then, not to gross you out, but then they removed their brains and left the brains next to their bodies. Why? When I went shortly thereafterwards, one of the survivors told me, the death squads and the United States government were sending a message to all of Latin America. This is what you get if you think. Don't think about the world, and don't try to do anything about it, or you're going to get something bad like this. This is the age-old method of deterrence from empire. You kill Jesus and Gandhi and Dr. King and Aya Korea and any public figures who are really about to upset the status quo. And that's where I'm coming from, having known historic martyrs. Their deaths actually ended the war in El Salvador. And that's why I later walked onto the Seymour Johnson Air Force Base in North Carolina. I mean, gosh, my friends were Daniel and Philip Berrigan. Dan is now 92 years old and very frail, so keep them in your prayers. These were really heroic priests, famous on the cover of Time magazine in the 60s and 70s for helping lead the movement against the war in Vietnam. And if you're friends of the Berrigans, you're going to have to get arrested like within 24 hours. And so now I've been arrested, you heard, like 80 times, and I'm an ex-con, and I'm a convicted felon, can never vote again. The government thinks me as the highest terrorist you can get, and I can't travel to a lot of countries. My phone is tapped, I'm under severe surveillance, and I have a serious problem with recidivism. Trying to make you laugh. Trying to say some people have to break the bad laws which legalize mass murder in our country and the world. If you study the movements, which I have done my whole life, really seriously, the abolitionists, this is all I studied, the abolitionists, the suffragists, the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement, and so forth, you find that in the end, change came when good people broke the bad laws and accepted the consequences. This is an age-old methodology of nonviolence to help the movement continue to move. So we walked into this military base, right through 10,000 soldiers, came up to one of the big F-15 fighter bombers, went up to the side of it, I pulled out a hammer, went up to the side and swung once on this big nuclear fighter bomber. You know, and it didn't even chip the paint. And for that act, I faced 20 years in prison. As I said to the judge later, I said, Your Honor, I'm just doing what it says in the Bible. The Holy Prophet Isaiah said someday these people are going to come along and beat their swords into plowshares and study war no more. Is there a problem, Your Honor? I'm just trying to do what Jesus commanded us in the Sermon on the Mount. Love your enemies. That's what he said. Love your enemies. Don't nuke them. That's the actual translation from the original. That didn't go over well with the judge either. This incredible experience. We were seeing, I trained for 10 years for this action. Ours was the 50th of 100 such actions. My friend Sister Megan is at 82, is sentenced to 5 more years in prison for doing a similar action at the Oak Ridge nuclear plant in Tennessee. We're seeing the future. This is a symbol of the future of the United States, which is dismantling these evil things, which have no right to exist. They're illegal under international law. And the Nuremberg principles, not to mention God and morality and theology, or being a human being. And eventually we will dismantle all these weapons. That's our future. We need the money. And so I did, time in jail and then later worked for the Fellowship of Reconciliation. Went to Iraq, and then I was very involved after September 11th, became the coordinator of all the chaplains for the Red Cross, working with the Family Center. I had 600 chaplains ministering to 50,000 direct people who lost loved ones. While I was doing that, I was coordinating the protests against the U.S. bombing of Afghanistan in Times Square. This seemed like a reasonable thing to do. Love your neighbor and your enemies. Show compassion at home and abroad. And I could tell you lots of stories about all of that too, but the religious order I'm part of had so many complaints I was kicked out of New York after the New York Times was. So I then moved to New Mexico, where I've been the poorest state in the country, #1 in military spending, #1 in nuclear weapons. We think there are 3,000 nuclear weapons at the Albuquerque airport, more than any place on the planet. #1 in child hunger, domestic violence, drug addiction, suicide, alcoholism, worst education. But at Los Alamos, the birthplace of the atomic bomb, there are more millionaires per capita than any place on the planet, and more PhDs than any other place on the planet. There's this beautiful place where they build every nuclear weapon, and Obama's trying to rebuild the darn place to put $4 billion into it to build the state-of-the-art plutonium bomb factory. You could argue Obama has done more for nuclear weapons than anybody since Reagan in 1983. Being an ex-con and spending time in prison really clarifies your relationship with your government. You understand about it. I'm very nonpartisan. But so what do you do? We formed this peace group, and we go there every year. We took up the book of Jonah. I know this is a little over the top, but I don't know. You tell me what you're doing for peace. I'm sharing my journey. And in the Bible, you remember the book of Jonah, he walks through Nineveh, calls everybody to repent, and the whole town puts on sackcloth and ashes, even the cattle. I thought that was pretty funny. And they all live happily ever after. It's the oldest form of political protest in human literature. So we formed the Sackcloth and Ashes Subcommittee. Built 500 sackcloths, small, medium, large. 500 big bags of ashes, took a year to do. On the 60th anniversary of Hiroshima, we went to the park where the actual bomb was physically made. We trained like Gandhi and Satyagrahis. We then walked through the entire town in total silence, and right on time, we all put on the sackcloth, poured ashes all over the ground, sat down in silence for 30 minutes to repent of the mortal sin of war and nuclear weapons and killing, and beg the God of peace for the gift of nuclear disarmament. And then we gathered back after 30 minutes. I've been to thousands of demonstrations, probably, maybe like you, and then I've never been to one. There were 500 of us. When we gathered back, everyone was in tears. And we're trying to get beyond the pointing fingers, we're better than you, and you horrible people building nuclear weapons. Actually, we're all in the same boat now, and we need these people. They're the only ones who know how to dismantle the darn things. We have to love these people. You see what I'm saying? Anyway, this hasn't gone over very well, but you do what you can. Here's my take on the world in a nutshell, talking about violence. It's a world of total violence. I was speaking in Oklahoma City a few days ago, and the reverend there, he introduced me saying he'd spent the week studying this new study which says there are 74 wars happening today, with the United States involved in every one, selling weapons to both sides in every war. That's where we get most of our money, that war. What? Organized mass murder of sisters and brothers. Now, there's 4 billion people on the planet living in subhuman conditions without adequate water, food, housing, health care, jobs, education, dignity. Now, that doesn't get it at all. The United Nations says 1 billion people are starving to death. Look that up. That should be the headline every day. Let's all stop what we're doing and go feed those people who are at various levels of malnutrition. No, did you read Oxfam announced last month? The 85 richest human beings on the planet, 85 billionaires, have more money than the bottom 50 countries of the world combined. 85 people have more money than 4 billion people. This is systemic, organized, structured, institutionalized injustice. No, we have 15 to 20,000 nuclear weapons still on the planet, enough to blow the planet up 20 times over. Look this up, study it, it's incredible. And our steel, our abuse of fossil fuels, our hatred of the earth, I think it's deliberate. I think the governments of the world know exactly what we're doing. We're hoping it'll happen. Catastrophic climate change. This is the world we're in. It's violence beyond our imagining. And it's perfectly legal. The end of the world is totally going to be legal. 1 billion people starving, like that's legal. Or nuclear weapons to exist. No. Yeah, I sometimes feel like I'm living in a zombie movie. People are just so crazy with violence, because violence is everywhere. It's all the violence you all know about, from racism, sexism, torture, executions. You have the death penalty still in Ohio. And you go down the list of 1,000 types of violence and all that you might be working on to stop. But now it's in all of us. We've internalized it. It's the air we breathe. It's how do you even describe it? It's so normal. Well, what's so scary too, it's spiritualized. This is God's will. Violence is not only right and moral, but holy. We have a manifest destiny, especially as Americans, to go and steal all the resources from those horrible people. We have to kill them and do that because it's all for us. God. Martin Luther King, the night before the government killed him, April 3rd, 1968, Memphis. He gave the famous speech, I've been to the promised land, I've seen, looked over. Just before that, he said, the choice is no longer violence or nonviolence. That's not what we're talking about. It's not violence or nonviolence. Well then, Martin, what is it? It's nonviolence or non-existence. This is what the Holy Prophet is telling us. Unless the whole human race becomes nonviolent, Dr. King said, we are doomed to our self-destructive violence. That's why this evening is not just a lecture. This is our lives, and for you young people, the rest of your lives. We all have to become nonviolent, Dr. King said. And King is saying, in so many simple ways, this violence doesn't work. Who's happy? But violence, in response to violence, it just leads to further violence. It's a never-ending downward spiral. War never brings peace. It always sows the seeds for future wars. War certainly can't end terrorism because war is terrorism. And war, by the way, it doesn't help democracy or children or our health or the environment, much less the spiritual life of being a human being. That's why I want us to not only renounce war, get rid of your guns, don't join the military, don't let any of your friends or relatives join the military, spend your life resisting the structures of war, but also denounce and resist the false spirituality of violence and war, and stand up to your family and friends and say, war is not the will of God. War is never blessed. War is never justified. War is the definition of the demonic. What I'm trying to talk about, if you're hanging in here with me, is death as a social methodology. This is biblical language. And for me, it's like poetry. It's the only way to describe the insanity of the world. And like killing somebody is okay, or an honor. Death as a social methodology. There was a great poet of the 1920s, maybe some of you remember, Edna St. Vincent Millay. She had that great poem, and the first sentence goes, I shall die, but that is all I shall do for death. And that's the vision of a peacemaker. We are not people who bring death to anything. So I invite you to use this word nonviolence and to talk about it. What do you think it means? How do you define nonviolence? How are you a person of nonviolence? And how can you go deeper into nonviolence? That's what Martin Luther King would say if he were here tonight. That's at the heart of everything he said, and that's the one thing we don't want to talk about what he said more than anything. How can Columbus, Ohio, dare I say Ohio, can we even imagine the United States become a place of nonviolence? Or the world? This is what we have to work on. Here's how I define it. See what you think about this. Nonviolence is a vision of the heart that looks out on the whole human race and sees all human beings, 7.2 billion people, every one of them your very sister and brother. This is the key to the whole thing. This is peace and nonviolence in a nutshell. Every human being is your very sister and brother, as much as your blood brothers and sisters. That's the spiritual life. We're already one. We're already reconciled. The gift of peace has already been given to us. And this is the whole point of the church or organized religion or spiritual life, everything. To go deep into the truth of reality of our common unity. And the deeper you go, this is what I want you to do, I urge you with your life, to the truth of our common unity, the more you realize we're one with all creatures and all of creation. It's so beautiful. You can never hurt anybody ever again because that's your sister, that's your brother. And you can never be silent when there's 74 wars and 20,000 nuclear weapons and 1 billion people starving or catastrophic climate change bearing down on us. There's nothing passive about peacemaking. It's active love, pursuing the truth of our common unity, reconciling with every human being, standing up publicly against every form of injustice and violence and war, practicing unconditional, non-retaliatory, universal love. It's wonderful. There's just this one catch. Are you ready? Are you sitting down? You're not going to like it. There is no cause, however noble, no matter what anyone will ever tell us for the rest of our lives, for which you and I will ever again support the taking of a single human life. This is the boundary line of nonviolence. We are not going to kill. We're not going to support killing. We're going to give our lives to stopping the killing. And once you agree to that boundary line, then you can become a human being. And love can begin to grow. You can begin to be compassionate and make peace with the whole human family. No, we can't have that. That's ridiculous. You got to kill like Hitler. No, we got to kill Saddam. We got to name somebody, Osama bin Laden. That's the whole point. We get to kill. Look, I promise I will give up drinking. I'm just going to have this one last glass of vodka. See what I'm saying? We're addicted to violence. And in nonviolence, we're stopping the addiction to death as a social methodology. Gandhi says we can tap into this as the way of God and it becomes power to change the whole world. So I don't know if you're still hanging in here with me. This thing is still active, but maybe I'll try to turn it off. But, sorry about that. Yeah, sorry. I've been trying to figure this out for 35 years. So this book I've written is, and I'm going around the country and the world talking about the nonviolent life, is the fruit of my efforts to try to articulate and explain nonviolence, because what the heck does it mean? Nobody is using that word, which is kind of why I like it. It just confuses everybody. I'm trying to make you laugh, but it's not working. So I've come up with an idea. This is the thesis of my book. See what you think about this. Nonviolence requires 3 simultaneous attributes. You have to do all 3 at the same time to live a holistic vision of nonviolence. Are you ready? Number 1, you gotta be really nonviolent to yourself. Great. Number 2, at the same time, you have to be perfectly nonviolent toward every human being on the planet and all creatures and all creation. While you're doing that, 3rd, you also have to be part of the global grassroots movements of nonviolence. Well, I can see that didn't go over too well. See, I think Martin Luther King and Gandhi were some of very, very few people who did all 3. You know, we're lucky. A lot of us maybe can do 1 or 2. But that's not it. You got to do all 3. For example, there's a lot of nice church people. I won't say any more than that because I'm trying to be nonviolent. Really peaceful. And, they're nice. And they're not doing anything about the starving children and the wars and the nuclear weapons. That's not nonviolence. I submit it's not Christianity. Because your silence and passivity in the face of the world is complicity with structured evil. On the other hand, there's a lot of us activists, and we're involved, and we're mean, because we're angry and we're all for peace. That doesn't work either, because we're mean and we're full of violence and we're mean to people around us. What Gandhi and Dr. King were able to do is really balance all 3. And this is what all of us have to try to do. So let me, if you can hang in here with me for a second, to say a word about each one. Number 1, how are you doing about being nonviolent to yourself? The point is to try to lessen the violence inside of us. Not to beat ourselves up. We are all victims of violence in this culture. Every human being in the world, but especially as Americans. When we're born, our parents were violent to us, other kids, and then we go through life wounded, and then, whether it's from World War II to, Vietnam to Central America and Iraq, or racism or sexism, the culture's violence upon you. And so you beat yourself up because you're used to violence. What I invite you to do is to cultivate interior nonviolence, to make peace with yourself. Because it's no fun to go through life miserable, being violent. As you get older, you students, you're going to discover that. And you have to figure out a way. How can I really be a peaceful person? And really, that's the way I live. I am really centered in mindful peaceableness every day. That's what the Buddhists taught. Thich Nhat Hanh, the great leader, my friend, he said, just look deeply within. What's going on? Why do you want to act out that way, violently? And how can you move on to a second thought, be nonviolent? And don't beat yourself up for this. We're going to keep lessening the violence. That means all the great saints and peacemakers through history say you have to take some time with the God of peace and meditation every day. Some quiet time. When nobody knows about this, for you students, go off on your own and get to know God, however your image of God is, or even the Holy Spirit of peace, or just peace, or Jesus. And the reason you don't want to do that is because the minute you're alone, all your junk comes up. That's the problem. Well, that's the point of prayer. To let it all go. Give it to God. The roots of violence in you, the roots of world in you, your woundedness, your hatred, your anger, your bitterness, your resentment. Give it to God. Forgive everyone who ever hurt you, and let God give you the gift of peace. That you become mystics of peace. And spend your life as a person of peace who has a real gift of peace to offer the world. Because as I was joking, there's no sense in being an activist and being such a horrible, angry, violent person. This just not going to work. And I've written a lot about that in my book. At the same time, though, secondly, your relationships with everybody. How do you practice nonviolence with people? I mean, of course, we're all for peace, but, you know, secretly, deep down, there's someone we'd really like to get back and do a little revenge. I thought you'd laugh at that, but maybe I told you. It's weird. The people who are difficult to you, maybe your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, that teacher, that kid in school, or the Pope, or the president, or somebody you hate. That person becomes your teacher of peace because they're showing how violent you are. And you get to meditate and reflect on how to be nonviolent toward that person. And it raises the question, who are you violent toward? How can you stop being violent toward people? We don't want to do that anymore. It's time to grow up. And what about your attitude toward creatures, all the animals, and all of creation? And how can we be nonviolent toward every human being on the planet? You have to be trained in this. Dr. King was training everybody. While you're doing that, third, you've got to be joining the global grassroots movement of nonviolence. You know what Dr. King said the night before he was killed was so exciting. He said, we're going to be the first people in history to finally learn the wisdom of nonviolence and lead humanity back from the brink of destruction. Friends, there have been 85 nonviolent revolutions in the last 40 years. We now know 2/3 of the human race are personally involved in grassroots movements of nonviolence. This is exciting. And changing the world only happens through movements. Bottom-up grassroots movements. That's how change comes, and you all got to be part of it. The great Archbishop Oscar Romero said, the day he was killed, nobody can do everything, but everybody's got to do something. I like that. Everybody can do something. So if you're involved in the movements, I just say, thank you, thank you, thank you. And if you're not, pick a cause and get involved. Something you're passionate about. The environment, or hunger, or ending these wars, or nuclear weapons, whatever it is. And get involved, because once you step into the world of violence, in the struggle, you're involved. They're all connected. All the issues are connected. And you're part of changing the world. My friends and I are going around the country and organizing what we're calling Campaign Nonviolence. And I brought about 1,000 brochures here for you. We're calling for 300 demonstrations across the country beginning September 21st, leading up to the congressional elections. We have 35 state coordinators. It's going to happen. And we're asking people to take to the streets under the banner of war. So I was in, I don't remember where I was yesterday, maybe Buffalo. No, Binghamton. They were working at Hancock Air Force Base where we have the drones. War and or poverty. And then in California, everybody's working on immigration and prison reform. In the South, fighting racism and cutbacks for, getting started, kids, education, jobs. And or the environment. Whether we're protesting Obama probably signing the Keystone Pipeline, fracking, abuse of fossil fuels. Bringing the issues together in a spirit of Kingian, Gandhian nonviolence and standing up publicly together, so we're not alone, and saying no, leading up to the congressional elections. I invite you all to be part of it. Here's something concrete you can do. Well, I know it's about midnight and I've gone on for a while, but I just wanted to say a few thoughts. When I worked at the Fellowship for Reconciliation about organized religion, I know this just makes you want to just drool, it's so boring. But I discovered from meeting thousands of faith-based activists that, not just reading in the books, but I invite all of you to think this, nonviolence is at the heart of every major religion, although you'd never know that. Judaism is all about shalom. You know, the prophet's saying, swords into plowshares, no more war. Chapter 11 of Isaiah says, no more death on all my holy mountain. The vision is spectacular. Hinduism is like embodied by Gandhi. Islam means peace. I know hundreds of Muslims in Detroit alone, radically committed to nonviolence, and they're telling me because of the Quran. I'm going, but that's not what George W. Bush said. And the Buddhists, don't get me started on these Buddhists, they're saying we're going to be so peaceful. This is tickling on. Every breath we breathe in for the rest of our lives will be peace. And we will be so centered, we're only breathing out peace. And we're going to have compassion, infinite compassion toward all sentient beings. No, on second thought, let's not stop. Let's have compassion even to the earth and the air and the sky. But for a moment, I just want to propose the possibility, I know it's going to be rough, but hold on, that even Christianity, and dare I say, Roman Catholicism, is about nonviolence. Now hold on. When I travel the world, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, I was in Afghanistan last year. They're saying, you're a Christian, you're for peace? I thought to be a Christian was to drop bombs. It's the government. Gandhi says Jesus is the most active person of nonviolence in the history of the world. I think that's the most incredible statement. And then poor Gandhi goes on and scratches his head and says, and the only people on the whole planet who don't know that Jesus is nonviolent are Christians. That's the question if you're a Christian. Was Jesus violent or nonviolent? If he's violent, forget him. If Gandhi's right, then everything has changed. And we're just beginning to understand this. It changes the theology, the spirituality, the church, everything. If he's what? The incarnation of nonviolence? The epitome of nonviolence? Yes. Gandhi read the Sermon on the Mount every morning and every evening for 43 years. He says these are the greatest writings of nonviolence in the history of the world. Love one another. Blessed are the peacemakers. Hunger and thirst for justice. Be as compassionate as God. The verse in chapter 5. Offer no violent resistance to one who does evil. You have to respond creatively with nonviolence. Love your enemies. And Jesus is healing everybody and teaching nonviolence. And then, like Gandhi on the Salt March, if you saw the movie, or Dr. King going into Birmingham, Jesus turns and marches to Jerusalem on a campaign of nonviolence. It's classic movement organizing. He sends 72 people ahead of him to prepare the way. And when he gets to Jerusalem, he walks into the temple where the religious authorities are working with the evil, horrible Roman Empire. I can't even say it. To steal all the money of the poor people in the name of God, in the house of God, and he turns over the tables of the bankers and says, no more injustice, we're a people of prayer. Well, if you do civil disobedience in the temple on the outskirts of this evil, horrible empire, you're going to be arrested and tortured and killed in 24 hours. That's what they do. And that's what happened. Just for the record, though, he doesn't hit anybody, hurt anybody, kill anybody, or drop any bombs. I just wanted to clarify. But he's not passive. He's daring, active, public, revolutionary nonviolence. He did over 150 acts of civil disobedience. I come to the conclusion that pretty much everything the nonviolent Jesus did was illegal. He was like a one-man crime when he's walking through the room. You're not violent at all. So I was talking about this in this church in this New Mexico, and the war in Iraq was going on. This sweet elderly woman raised her hand and said, John, this stuff on nonviolence is so interesting. It's very intriguing. And me, personally, I never forgot it. With me, I'm a big fan of peace. Big fan. But sometimes you just got to kill somebody. In New Mexico, we just come right out with it. She's saying, the church was right. If you remember, in a nutshell, the year 315, the evil, horrible Roman Emperor, Constantine, overnight says he's Christian. Okay, now all you Christians, you don't have to be nonviolent anymore. You're all Roman citizens of the empire. You can all join the military. You can all kill for me now. Let's throw out the Sermon on the Mount. And he turned to the pagan Cicero to begin to come up with a just war theory that led to Aquinas. And if you follow these seven conditions, bomb the hell out of everybody for Jesus. And then we have crusades where we got to go kill millions of people for Jesus and burn those horrible women at the stake. And today, at the Pentagon, there's like 25 masses every morning and 100 Bible studies. And at Los Alamos, the 20,000 people who build our nuclear weapons today are all Christian. And they all go to church. And the priests and ministers bless our nuclear bombs. If that's what you think, this is Holy Week, I think. Some of us know that that's the week we commemorate the death of Jesus. Go to what happens next in the story. During Holy Week, Holy Thursday, well, it would have been like Tuesday he did the civil disobedience in the temple. That would be today. He's in the upper room. It's Passover. He takes the bread. He says, my body broken for you. He takes the cup of wine. This is my blood shed for you. If you were a good American, Jesus would have said, go break their bodies for me. Go shed all their blood for me. No. My body broken for you. My blood shed for you. Do this. If you're a Christian and you participate in Christian communion service, you are participating in the methodology of nonviolence. We give our lives. We don't take our lives. He's in the Garden of Gethsemane. Here come the horrible soldiers to arrest him. What does St. Peter do? St. Peter, the head of the community, of women and men, is thinking to himself, oh my God, they're going to get our guy. And my job is to protect our guy, the Holy One. He's in trouble, look. And what is he thinking? St. Peter's thinking to himself, if there's ever a just war in all of human history, if violence is ever divinely sanctioned, if there was ever a moment to kill for a good cause, this is it in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he's right. Go to kill, to protect our guy, the Holy One. And as he goes to kill the soldiers, the commandment comes down, put down the sword. Friends, look it up. Those are the last words of Jesus to the church before he was killed. It's the last thing he said. It's the last thing they heard him say. And it's the first time they understood who this guy is. Peter's going, oh my God, this hippie is all into agape, compassion, blessed are the peacemakers. He's not going to defend himself with violence, which means do the math. We don't get to defend ourselves with violence, which means we're out of here. And they all leave him, and they go read Gandhi on Holy Week. Jesus goes deeper into nonviolence. Brutally tortured. He doesn't even get angry or retaliate. As they're killing him, he's saying, you're all forgiven, but the violence stops here in my body. The days of killing and war, death as a social methodology are over. You know, there was a new non-canonical gospel just discovered. And this scholar from Oxford, he wrote about it. And now we know that in this new version, Jesus appeared to St. Peter. And he said to Peter, avenge my death. Peter went and assassinated Pilate. And then they went and swarmed all these terrorists. You're looking at me like you believe me. I'm making that up. No! That you're going, I can see you're going, oh good, enough of this nonviolence. Let's get some retaliation going. He comes back and makes breakfast for these people, Jesus. There's no anger, there's no retaliation, there's no revenge, there's no resentment. We get mad at the smallest things. The risen, nonviolent Jesus comes back and says, peace be with you, peace be with you, peace be with you. Friends, you go and walk the road to peace and practice active, daring, public nonviolence in a world of total violence. Fulfill your vocations to be who you are, who you're called to be. Peacemakers, and beloved sons and daughters of the God of peace. Thanks very much for listening to me. Very nonviolent. We have time for rebuttal, for comments, questions. Especially the students, feel free to ask or comment anything. Yeah.
You mentioned in the interview something about trying to influence House representative elections. If the state is violent, is your point to try to participate in that?
You know, I don't know. This is a great debate among everybody. And, you know, basically my conclusion is to be, when we're talking about working for the abolition of war itself.
If the state is violence, can you use the state to end violence?
Right. That's what I'm saying. People are debating on that. And I think in movements, in the vision of nonviolence, there's a million ways to do it, as long as it's really nonviolent. For me, though, the answer is no. I come at this as a really probably a Christian anarchist, the tradition of Dorothy Day. and Thomas More. And I grew up in Washington, D.C. My father was the head of the National Press Club. I mean, I literally, hung out as a kid with senators and press people and so forth. And I was appalled. So I had a kind of an understanding early on. But we do need laws to outlaw these, to change this country. And King showed that you need a movement to finally, in the end, our political leaders will follow. So I'm putting my energies, I actually didn't even talk that much about the church tonight, or so much the state, but in the movements. The movement. But others disagree with me on that. It's a question, again, of how do we bring about change? And certainly everybody's got to do whatever they can. And I invite you to go and discern and figure out what you're going to do for peace and justice. I'm putting my energies in the movement building because I think that's how I see changes happening in our own country. Another thought or question or reflection? Yeah.
One of the things I'm concerned about is drone warfare.
Yeah.
Because that is clearly assassination, sanctioned assassination. And these are even suspects. There's just suspects. And so I attended a drone teach-in in Cleveland a couple weekends ago.
Yeah.
And Via Benjamin was there, and I got to meet her.
Great.
And there was a T-shirt that I brought back that said, you can pretend to care, but you cannot pretend to show up.
That's great. Yeah. I went to Afghanistan last year and to be a guest of, there's 25 teenage kids in Kabul who've each lost a young person to the U.S. drones. For those of you students, I invite you to hear what I just said. 25 teenage kids, and they're forming a peace community, and they're memorizing Dr. King's speeches in Farsi. They're saying, as Muslims, we want to be Gandhi and Dr. King. So they're having peace marches in Kabul and getting massive death threats. And they've already lost all their loved ones. And I sat with them and took dictation in their stories and heard about how our drones swoop down over the villages. There's nobody in these massive planes. There's only gasoline, bombs, and cameras. And they drop these bombs. And 9 out of the 10 attacks are killing civilians. It's very clear now. But they're terrorizing all the people in Afghanistan. They're all poor. 2 million people have been killed in Afghanistan in the last 40 years, more than any place on the planet. In terms of this structured war. These drones are not making us safe, and the lie that they're saving American lives. That's the same lie we heard about Hiroshima. We're turning millions of people around the world against us. We'd all join the Taliban if you saw these things. And I've seen them. They're so scary. And now 40 nations are building drones. And soon every nation will have drones, and they're going to be coming over us. This is all going to come back. You reap what you sow. So we can talk about this. And it's nice to talk about peace. And we're all fans of peace. But like your t-shirt says, it doesn't matter. Unless you get involved in the movement. You have to get involved and help the movement grow to stop this death and killing. Thank you. Somebody else have a comment or question? Yeah.
So why do you think there is violence and that it seems to be the natural default state?
It's an interesting question. I think the natural default state is not violence. That to be a human being is to be nonviolent. And my theory is that the baby is perfectly nonviolent, vulnerable and unarmed. Hold on, I know you're going, well, that's crazy talk. Thousands of years from Cain and Abel, the first murder, to the institution of murder, mass murder in war, thousands of years ago. And now you put all your money, who can understand the trillions of dollars that go into the war? What $1 trillion could do. We could feed every starving child on the planet in 2 weeks. The UN says that's no problem. There's infinite money left over for housing, healthcare, jobs, for every human being on the planet. And then there's infinite money still to educate everyone in nonviolent conflict resolution. And after thousands of years of this, we're so brainwashed and we're taught by the media and the government, and now the churches, to be violent. Or you always are violent, but sometimes you really have to be violent. And it's okay to vaporize people. It's okay to kill people to show that killing people is wrong. The best way to stop the killing is to kill them all. That's insanity.
Well, I was thinking more back in the days of Homo sapiens killing.
No, so I got invited to this conference, if you can imagine me, of all these PhD anthropologists. It was in Louisville about 10 years ago. There were a couple hundred people, and they wanted to talk with me, of all people. And they had been studying this question. And they're saying if you really study the history, and there's a couple of indigenous tribes still, they're totally not violent. And that's the way humanity originally was. But it's just so, we just prefer violence, or we were raised in it, or taught it, and we're trained in it, and now we believe the lie. So another way then, and this I write about in my book, to define nonviolence would be to remember who we are. Violence is forgetting. I mean, the minute that you're not my sister, you're just a thing, then I can kill you, because you're not human. Nonviolence is remembering every day that we are human and sisters and brothers with one another. And violence is forgetting who we are. That's why Jesus says, blessed are the peacemakers, they'll be the sons and daughters of the God of peace. Nonviolence is claiming your identity, remembering it, to try to return to the way that the world was created. Now I speak this way because I think that's the way the biblical vision is. Isaiah speaks of the child, even nonviolent animals. That's the more interesting, outrageous thing to talk about. You know, if we had no wars and no nuclear weapons and we fed everybody, and there weren't 85 billionaires with all the money, everybody had food, housing. I mean, Isaiah says everyone gets their own vine and fig tree. Then you're putting in the money so that when the tsunami happens, no one dies. If an earthquake happens, no one dies. You would never hurt the earth to begin with. We wouldn't be in this position. And I mean, I can't even say it with a straight face. Isaiah talks about a lion and a lamb and the snake and the cow and the child in the middle and no more death or violence. It's a beautiful oracle of what creation was intended to be. But even if I guess I just say, I urge all of us to be part of these movements because it's the greatest thing we can do with our lives. Maybe I can end with one story. My friend was Howard Zinn. He was a famous historian. He wrote A People's History of the United States. And he told me just before he died a few years ago that he'd been studying all our movements, and he finally came to the conclusion after 35 years, the abolitionist movement, the suffragists, the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement, they were all, from the beginning, the middle, right to the end, hopeless, hopeless, hopeless. I was like, oh, thanks a lot. That's really encouraging. And then he said, and then I realized there was a breakthrough of hope, and I asked myself, why? And this is what I invite you to reflect on. Because in all the movements in our own history, the abolitionists, the suffragists, the women working for the right to vote, the labor movement, the civil rights movement, all of them were made up of ordinary people who did one or two or three things for justice and peace every day, and they didn't give up, even though they knew they were never going to live to see the great positive outcome they were working for. They did it because it was the right thing to do. The right thing to do is worth doing, and this is the best thing to do. You and I are trying to go beyond all of them and to work for the abolition of war and poverty and hunger and nuclear weapons and environmental destruction and welcome a new world of nonviolence. So thanks for listening to me. Thanks for having me, and carry on the struggle.